And we're back, and this episode is depressing, but it gives us an excuse for Falconeer to ramble about animism.
And I can rant, but I mean, yeah, that is a complicated concept.
And falling stars. And look in the sky. Over the enemy's pyramid. And so many strange people.
Concentrate, Toy.
Then tell me another story, sister. Tell me our story.
Very well. Many days and many nights ago, a foolish pharaoh cast the scales out.
This is kind of important. I know we normally talk this over, but talk over things, but this is basically all of what's happening has happened in this
Did our
quest
father
line.
suffer?
The high priest of Amun suffered most of all. His duty was to serve both the pharaoh and the gods, and he was torn.
Then there was the Great War. I remember being moved from place to place. Always moving.
To protect you. The high priest's 7 children were his greatest treasure. When the war ended, he discovered Egypt's peace could live on through them. Forever.
But now the peace is over. Is that our fault?
No, my son. You have all done more than a father could ask. I have been so very proud of you in every lifetime.
Every lifetime. Do you think he reincarnates or just stays as he is?
To come.
I think he stays as he is.
All right.
So yeah, this episode's going to be depressing because we find out how the Sentinels are made.
Mm-hmm.
It's also an investigation mission, so be prepared for me. I actually took...
The high priest of Amun despairs of his sacrifice. His hope must be restored.
Oh,
Well,
God.
the gaze of all the gods, even the false
Hmm?
one. Where their sights cross, you will find the places he buried his duty and his shame.
So yeah, I take one look at the thing in the browser and then just pull it up on my phone to look back at it. Because
Yeah.
we have like 5 parts we have to find, and we have to look at where the sight lines of the statues interconnect.
That one. If your game involves something that involves a puzzle solution that can be hampered by render distance, that's gonna make things that may be an issue you want to correct. That is a direct mechanical gameplay issue. But yeah. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, just look at this map.
you got it annotated. God. Anyway. So, okay. The funny thing is, this animism is a term for this. It's actually an insulting and old and slightly racist term. It's the one I'm used to and the one I stumble into when I'm not thinking. But I'm not gonna go too deep into it. Anyway, but I know I've mentioned it before, and I don't think there's a better term out there, because basically every other term that could be used has been stolen by people who are trying to sell you crystals off of TikTok. So I'm just gonna go with animism and apologize to my teachers. Anyway, basically, animism is the belief that nature is permeated by spirits. And you've probably heard of like nature spirits, but what I'm talking about is the idea that just about every, and if I say just about every stone or plant or spirit or like river or whatever has its own independent spirit, I'm probably thinking of something you've seen, and it sounds like something out of Pocahontas, and you probably thinking of something that you've seen similarly. But it's worth noting that the versions of this belief system that people in monotheist cultures like us tend to get fed are very much, like I mentioned before, how the idea of this, like, there's a division between the all powerful parts of the divine and the not very powerful parts of the divine. That's something that's very monotheist, and it's not present in most animist traditions, or if it is, it's something that's like it kind of is in Hinduism, but that's also because Hinduism is it just gets so philosophical when you get into like the depths of how the religion works. That there are branches of Hinduism that can fairly say they are completely monotheistic, and but even though the religion as a whole is very much polytheistic. But yeah, that's not really so. Okay, I'm getting off track. Anyway, basically, it isn't just like individual things that have embodied spirits that are like represent them or embody them. People have spirits. Concepts have spirits. Countries have spirits. Like whole like realms of existence and something like the concept of kingship will have a spirit. And most animist systems are ultimately polytheist in that the spirits that embody the most important concepts to a culture form a pantheon, and we call them gods. And on a very deep level, while the spirit of kingship or the spirit of civilization or of writing or of technology or sophistication is just unbelievably more powerful than the spirit of the rock that's outside your house, ultimately they're the same type, not even if they aren't of the same like scale. And this is the different versions of this belief pop up in different ways in different places, but most cultures end up developing animism naturally at some point. And either that animism over time gets displaced by a monotheistic religion, or it is able to grow itself in sophistication until it can fend off monotheistic like converting traditions. And that's what happened or you get a fusion sometimes. Usually, actually, you get a fusion where, like in Japan, basically they took Buddhism and hybridized it with their native traditions to get what we call Shintoism today. And in China, they hybridized a bunch of different religions to create what's called traditional Chinese folk religion today. And Hinduism ended up just going completely into developing itself until it hit the point where it was theologically complex and compelling enough that there's no monotheistic religion has been able to crack it. But so that concept of like an animating spirit being behind everything underlies most of these traditions anyway. And it's a very human thing that we kind of slip into just naturally, because you will have people like people will will yell at their computers when they're not working, or talk to them, or will talk to their cars as like their people or like their girlfriend sometimes. And it just the personifying something, just thinking about how like treating something like it that isn't intelligent as if it is intelligent, because that's how you connect to something. That's how the human brain works. It's a very deep thing, and that's the source of a lot of that sort of impulse that leads to the rise of these animist elements of these faiths. And I don't want to say that any of these are wrong, or that, because I can't say that animism is untrue, because there are a lot of practicing people in religions and belief systems who are very much animists and will tell you, yes, that is true. Please do not insult my religious beliefs. So, and it's unfalsifiable anyway, so it's not even worth trying to disprove unless you're one of those insufferable internet atheists who all ended up going alt-right eventually. And that's another story. Anyway, the thing about... So I mentioned a little bit earlier how there's no strict divine... there are two ways I can go with this. I'll go ahead and give you the option. One is how gods are concepts and how that explains how most myths work. And two is how you become a god.
Teach me how to become a god.
Okay, so this isn't universal in all, like, polytheistic traditions. And I don't want to call. I'm trying not to call them animists because that basically the term comes from ethnography in the 1800s, and it was used to talk about how silly these non-white people were who worshipped their rocks. And so you really can't use that in an academic context without sounding like you're basically going back and giving these stuffy Victorians who would have hated you for not being like, it would have hated you for being 1/8 Irish, and like telling them how great they are. So I'm just going to call them polytheistic, even though strictly speaking that's not accurate, and there are monotheistic belief systems that include animism. But that's another story I don't want to go into. Anyway,
I'm really tempted to just say, yeah, we call that Catholicism.
Sort of. Well, I mean, strictly speaking, Catholicism basically kind of parasitized traditional Roman religion. Everything from sainthoods down to family altars. Like, if you are familiar with family altars in the way that they work, that was lifted in Catholicism specifically. That was lifted directly from the concept of lares, which are Roman household gods, which were the spirits of your household. And Roman Catholicism did a lot of this. They basically took the underlying theology and completely rejiggered it to be Christian. And
what's that quote from one of the church's early theologians? I think it's something like, if you find them worshiping a tree, don't cut down the tree, tell them about Jesus. Sanctify the tree and tell them it's an aspect of Jesus.
That sounds like something they would not have come out and said, but would have tried to make sure nobody wrote down after they told them. But basically, they would just.
I've heard it as a phrase about Catholicism and the early church's syncretization beliefs.
Yeah. And there are multiple saints who never existed. Like Saint Bridget is a Irish goddess that just got a saint added to her name and got treated like a saint. But like what Catholicism did all over the place was sort of exactly that. They hollowed out the theology behind it and replaced it with something that taught similar lessons and that had required similar practices, but was agreed with Catholic theology, whatever that was at the time. But that's another story. So, okay, as far as back to becoming a god. Okay. So I mentioned how people have spirit. Like in a lot of animist belief systems, people have spirits. And that is something that... Oh, and by the way, I will mention the definition of animist I've been using, or polytheist, let's go back with that. The Greeks and Romans were full-throated believers in that. They were the term, if you've ever heard the word demon, that comes from the term daimones, or daimon, I think daimones is actually plural, but it's, and daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N, is the singular, but that was a personal spirit, and that term got reappropriated because the New Testament was written in Greek, and it borrowed a lot of Greek concepts to talk about the concepts it had to talk about. And that's the one that it basically rejiggered around. It's like the spirits. And basically, if you die, your spirit does not, necessarily. It can disappear, it can be, like, disgraced or thrown away or whatever, but it's still around. It doesn't always necessarily, like, a lot of polytheistic faiths don't have an afterlife that you really want to be in, or they have an afterlife that isn't particularly great, or is good, but it's just like another version of reality rather than the sort of like
Elysium we believe in when we think about the Christian, or I mean the Christian heaven. I don't know what the Jewish heaven is like. Is it like the Christian heaven?
There is no Jewish heaven. Jewish heaven is at the end. Everybody falls asleep until Judgment Day, and then God judges people and either obliterates their souls or just does a fusion dance.
Oh,
and
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that from one of the earlier episodes. That was... I've never heard that mentioned in context of Judaism, so it's a very trippy thing.
Yeah.
I was always under the assumption that we stole the idea of heaven from
Nope.
Jews, not Greek philosophers.
No, you stole that idea probably from Persians.
Ah.
But give me a second to blow my nose. Let's see if your editor cuts that out or not.
He won't now that it's a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, where was I? Right. But yeah, and early Christianity borrowed a lot of concepts. Like, early Christian theologians developed a lot of stuff on their own, but I've heard it said basically early Christianity is half Judaism and half Platonism with some Zoroastrianism added for spice. Like,
it's the English language of religions.
That's a pretty good way of putting it, honestly. God, I love how dumb English is. But that's another story that I could say for a later video.
Well, after this is Transylvania, so you should read up on, and it's just vampires and werewolves. I'll spoil that now. It's Transylvania, of course. It's just vampires and werewolves.
Well, okay, but there's also, there's plenty of everything from Soviets to Romans there that I can talk about, and there's actually a lot of nature spirit shit that goes on, so I can follow up on this there.
Yeah, the weird tree things.
Yeah, this you get the god of an area, which is a very polytheistic concept. But okay, so let me keep rolling this back. I went on a med holiday this morning, so the ADHD meds are not present, and I'm very rambly.
Oh, why are you on a med holiday? Those aren't good.
No, well, okay. If they're controlled, I'm on Vyvanse, I'll put it that way. And the thing about Vyvanse is a very, very powerful drug, and if you get habituated to it, and its effects aren't as good as your body get used to its effects. It's you have to keep climbing and get the same effects, and that's not necessarily good for you. My resting heart rate is about double what it usually is, what a normal person's heart rate is. And while I do keep careful track of my, cardiovascular health, and despite having such a high resting heart rate, my blood pressure is slightly lower than normal. Everything seems fine, but it's something I have to watch. So once in a while,
that's interesting because I have a heart condition that does similar. The blood vessels in my legs do not constrict properly. I have a postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's very rare. But essentially all the blood will pool in my lower body, and my heart rate will climb and my blood pressure will drop.
Oh, you have POTS?
Yes.
My sister has POTS.
My sister also has POTS. Yeah, we lost the genetic lottery pretty much.
Yeah, that happened to me too. I can talk about everything from scoliosis to IBS to autism. It's a great thing. But
well,
whatever.
I have autism, bipolar, and POTS, and my sister has my sister was premature, so she has all that and a bunch of other shit.
God. But yeah, and I'm glad that POTS is getting better now. Nobody used to believe it existed, and it can be very dangerous.
Oh, my dad beats himself up about it because I was a very fat child because I was on Depakote, and that makes you eat. And I would go out and do stuff, and I'd be like, I have to sit down, and they'd be like, oh, you're just lazy, you need to work out more. He beats himself up over it, and I don't blame him. Nobody knew.
Mm-hmm. That is my position towards a huge amount of my childhood, but I'd rather. You know what? I would much rather talk about becoming the process of apotheosis.
Yes, we've distracted ourselves very much, but that's because there's not much going on until the next cutscene.
Yeah. Long story short, I'll tie what I was talking about in a knot. I do occasionally go on controlled med holidays because that increases the effect. which helps me focus at work, and something I've been doing for years quite safely. And I've also been through the whole time checking with actual psychiatrists, and they've given me the okay.
Okay, that was just my fear, because I've known those people who go to a psychiatrist and get help, and then they're like, oh, I don't need help anymore, and then go off their meds.
Yeah, I will go back on my meds tomorrow.
Okay.
This doesn't last. I would not take a med holiday that lasted to more than 1 day voluntarily. That's a terrible idea.
I remember once I had to detox off everything because I was in an asylum, and oh my god, that was not fun.
Yeah, I remember there were points where I had to get off both Risperdal and a benzo due to...
Oh god. That sounds horrible.
I will tell you this. As bad as my health is, the one thing that I seem to handle really well is medication withdrawal, psychiatric or not. Like on benzos, like having taken several, like a significant amount a day for years, I was able to break it within 3 weeks, and I wasn't anything more than irritable. Like,
well, that's way better than what happened to Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, well, okay. Granted,
you didn't get a crazy Russian doctor to put you in a medical coma.
I mean, well, granted, I had a lot less karma coming from me than Jordan Peterson did.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
And speaking of religious concepts that aren't totally common in the English-speaking world, let's go back to apotheosis. Okay. So, here's the thing. And the way that this works varies depending on cultures, and not all cultures have that concept. Some do, but because they borrowed it and they don't think that it's actually possible. And, well, at this point, that's almost every culture. But, like, long story short, many polytheistic cultures have a way that spirits can increase in power and size and, like, importance. And there's no reason... It's the Air Bud approach to godhood. There's nothing that says in the rule book that a human spirit cannot become as powerful as any other god, as long as there's, like, enough. Usually you can basically form the original. Like, the word cult comes from the concept of people worshipping a spirit of a dead hero. And that hero, like, the word hero was used for the object of a cult. And it became the word hero that we know today because we borrowed it from the Greek and just sheared it of any religious connotations. But basically they would be spirits that acted as gods and would intervene on behalf of their followers. And because there wasn't this huge hard divide between, like, in a monotheistic culture, we treat the idea of a human being treated as God as, like, unless it's a religion that we're already familiar with, it's like, it is hubris at best. But they weren't pretending to, like, becoming a god did not mean moving into becoming a complete ruler of the universe. It meant a spirit that was able to look out for you, or that you could propitiate for various things. So you could literally form a cult. Like, have I ever told you about Antinous?
No.
Okay, so Roman Emperor Hadrian. He's very famous for being a big builder. He was a huge Grecophile who built shit all over the empire that looked Greek. Ancient Jews hated his fucking guts because he's the guy that started the diaspora. After crushing another rebellion, he literally expelled the vast majority of the Jewish population just from Judea and scattered them across the empire and drove a lot of them back east into Persia, which very happily accepted a big influx of people who now hated Rome's gods. And that's another story. And he was also gay, and he had a boyfriend who was much younger than him named Antinous. He was from Egypt. We don't know that much about him. We know that he was generally considered very attractive. by everybody that met him. He seems to have been a pretty inoffensive person, but mostly we just know that Hadrian thought he was the best thing ever. And
I'm going to say something very cursed right now.
What?
Because I can't help myself.
Oh God.
Hadrian was a daddy, and he found a twink he loved so much he made them a god.
Well, what happened is this particular twink fell off a boat and drowned in the Nile. And Hadrian was just he was just distraught over it. And he sank imperial government funds into deifying Antinous' spirit as a spirit of basically youth and beauty, and got people to worship him. And this cult that he founded lasted cutscene time. I don't know if this
Yes, I don't know if this is an authentic prayer to Amun, but given the level of research they've done, I'm guessing it is.
I don't know. I actually doubt it, but I also can't say no.
I mean, we have existent prayers written on papyrus. I mean, there's no reason they wouldn't have just been able to call an Egyptologist and say, hey, how do you pray to Amun?
They have, at so many times in this game, taken random shit and just pretended that it was authentic because it sounded right, and also referenced things that would be helpful. This might be real, but I don't know.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is the creation of the Sentinels, which ties into why we were talking about animism, because apparently he ritually sacrificed his children and bound them into these statues.
Mm-hmm. He deified his kids, and that is why they are still around. Rather than letting them pass on to the next life, as is Egyptian tradition, he bound them in these statues in this world to serve this purpose. So
my other question is, oh God, who was it who was supposed to sacrifice his kid until God said, "Just kidding"?
Abraham.
Oh, Abraham and Isaac. Yeah, that was what I was thinking.
And poor Isaac, Isaac doesn't do jack shit. Isaac almost dies, and then he gets punked by his son, and that's all that he does in the course of the Bible. His son is Jacob, who steals his birthright, and then promptly gives it up again by running away. So the older son gets the birthright anyway. But that's another story that I can tell some other day. But yeah, was that just a question, or were you leading somewhere with it?
And that was just a question. I couldn't remember.
Right. Yeah. Wow, we're both sick today. Anyway.
I got COVID a couple months ago, and I've had this cough since then.
Yeah.
That's the only problem, but I'm thinking it's related to my sleep apnea.
Yeah. Sleep apnea can do that to you. It's bad, but anyway.
Mine is apparently severe, according to my doctor.
Oh, good. Oh, that's great news.
I don't know if I have to get a CPAP or the surgery.
I know my dad's on a CPAP, and it works fine for him. But
I'm hoping
he hates it.
I'm kind of hoping it's the surgery, so they can just one and done it.
You know, as long as if you can one and done it, then there you go. But anyway,
I mean, I know we're talking over something, but it's just siblings fucking bickering. And apparently they've been bickering for 3,000 goddamn years.
So I'm not going to settle anything anytime soon. So yeah, fuck it. But anyway, I keep trying to talk about gods, and we keep diverting into heart conditions and twinks. Anyway, okay, okay. What was it?
You had talked about hypothesis and hero cults.
Apotheosis is the term.
Apotheosis.
That's literally becoming a god. Oh, and God's concepts. Let's see how much time we have left in the video. Yeah, we got more than enough time for this. So, okay. As has been frequently noticed by people who are to look at these myths and go, wow, everyone involved is a terrible person. Gods are assholes. In almost every tradition, gods, even active ones, gods are often do really awful things. and are simultaneously being treated as like odd figures of respect. And that really baffles a lot of people from monotheistic cultures who look at that and go like, yeah, what? Granted, those monotheistic cultures often have like saints or teaching figures of their own who are just as morally questionable, but at least those are almost always like, you know, either human figures, or that whole thing being ineffable is kind of the point, because you're not supposed to be able to understand the universe. That is, like, the monotheistic God is everything, and nobody can understand everything. But that teleology is another subject I won't go into. Anyway, the thing about gods in most polytheistic traditions is that thinking of them as people is not only kind of counterproductive, but it's not how people at the time thought of them either. Like, they anthropomorphized them to a great deal. They attached various meanings to their behavior, but actually, you know what? I'll take a look at the Greek gods and just run down the list, and I'll dissect how this works with them. But like I said, spirits represent something in nature, everything from people to rocks to regions to concepts. And gods are spirits of concepts and embody the behavior of those concepts. So take Zeus, who's famous for, like, he's the king of the gods, and yet he's a horrible rapist who breaks everything he touches. Zeus is the concept of power and the god of power. He's associated with the sky because the sky is unlimited and the ultimate authority over, like, there's a Greek word for it, autokrator, which means self-ruler. And that was the title of the Byzantine emperor, one of the titles of the Byzantine emperor during the empire, even though it's way after this period, because there was no ruler who could tell the Byzantine emperor what to do as his lord, you know? The sky is associated with kingship, as Zeus is the god of the sky, because the sky is limitless and there's nothing above it. He's associated with thunder because thunder is irresistible. It is destructive, it is unpredictable, but it can't really be fought off with the technology they had. And he's associated with all of this abuse of power because it is abuse of power, and that's what bad kings do. That like, using your power for your own gain is something that powerful people almost always end up doing, even the well-meaning ones. And that's just because they are so far above an ordinary person in their ability to get stuff done. And so he, of course he abuses his power. Of course he goes around and does awful things. He is a embodiment of the concept of domination, just as much as he is the embodiment of just rulership. And he punishes violations of the social order. Like, the original wolf was the origin of wolves in Greek myth is Zeus went in disguise to go and visit some local guy, and this local guy fed him a human to fuck with him because he didn't like a random beggar demanding hospitality. And so he was punished by being forced to eat meat for the rest of his life and his descendants' life. Because even though Zeus violated the social order himself by abusing his power, he was still an embodiment of the concept of power. And so he punished people who abused power, which makes, if you think of him like a human, it makes him a massive hypocrite. If you think of him like a concept that has some level, even a limited level of free will, that becomes a lot less odd, because he's ultimately just acting in accordance with his nature. Likewise, you get somebody like Hera, who is the goddess of family, and she's the goddess of family, she's the goddess of queenship, she's the goddess of, like, just like of a different kind of political power, essentially. And so you get her, like, people praying to her to preserve their marriages, the wife of someone whose marriage was constantly being violated, because that's, even her pushing back when that happens is part of the responsibilities of someone in that position. And even as her husband abused his power, she abused her power, because that's the power that she had, if that makes sense. Give me a second, I need to get a drink of water. I've been talking for a long time. Beg pardon. Okay. You have something to say?
I was just thinking, is the reason they've never made a truly accurate adaptation of Grease because it would be so insanely misogynistic?
Okay. Here's the thing about ancient Greek misogyny. Well, it was very real. It's also a lot more complicated than people tend to think. Like, people will talk about, for instance, you will see people talking about how Athenian women in ancient Greece, after they got married, were not allowed to leave their houses. They were supposed to spend time within their families, like confines, having kids and raising them, and never do anything else. And that is misogynistic. It was horrible. Except there's a bunch of asterisks on that. The first being the vast majority of Athenian women never did that. That was a rich people thing. Again, politics are blowing my nose. I don't know what it is. Like, the vast majority of people would leave the house. In fact, Athenian fishwives, like the wives of fishermen, were famous for setting up stalls and yelling at people really aggressively. And that was an accepted part of Athenian life. And even for those women who did stay at home, often, and when I say often, I mean this is kind of what they did. They spent as much of their time, or if not more, running the business concerns. They were considered, like, women were considered the ones who were best at math and best at household management, to the point that the word economy comes directly from the Greek word household management. Like, it is a literal that's where they lifted the concept. That women held the purse strings and men went out and made investments, even though men were still the dominant people in that dominant, like, part of that relationship. And meanwhile, in Sparta, you have women who had a greater deal of prominence, who were able to have actual political influence, and they were still ultimately subordinate to men, to the point where there was an institutionalized kidnapping of women happened all over the place, as well as massive, wide-scale slavery. And I don't even want to go into the Helots, because that's actually something that is kind of horrifying to think about. So, shit was bad.
Yeah, that's some Draco level shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, if you don't know what the Draco are, don't look it up. SM Sterling is really fucked up.
He's a weird fucking dude.
I think he actually got banned from a website.
Oh yeah, he got banned from alternatelhistory.com because he kept defending, like, he wrote the Draka to be evil, but he succeeded a little too much in a kind of suspicious way, you know.
It's the sort of writing where you go, you were writing this with one hand, weren't you?
Yeah. You got too into it. You masturbated too close to the sun. It's too obvious. But God. Anyway, but yeah, I can go.
We're about to get a cut. We're about to get a cut scene. We just got to present this ram-headed sphinx to, and that honestly makes me think of the golden calf, to Tutmos here.
Mm-hmm. The golden calf, by the way, fun fact, is probably an explicit condemnation of the concept of animism. It basically, you don't create spirits that you worship. I'm the spirit you worship. You can acknowledge them, and the Bible frequently acknowledges them, but you cannot afford them any worship as a Jew, because that is breaking the covenant.
Baba, the board is ready.
So yeah.
Yeah, this is a really sad cutscene.
You promised. And maybe I'll let you win this time.
So, what brings you, Father?
I've just come to see you all, my
time, Bubba?
I brought you stories.
Great. More stories.
And a postcard from Reykjavik, a city so far north that it's almost always covered in snow.
Snow? I want to see the snow. Can you bring us there someday? Please, Bubba.
Oh, yes, please. I'd like to see the snow as well.
Someday.
Did Egyptians even fucking know what snow was?
Probably from mountains in the south.
Okay, that's fair.
My sweet.
For as long as we've been trapped here, you've brought us only
And
stories
they've
and
definitely
pictures.
heard of it
How
by
much
that
longer do you intend to keep this up?
by now.
For as long as it takes, I will never leave you.
Never is a very long time.
Bubba, come. I'm ready to play.
I'll be right with you, Mao.
This is just a really sad scene.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up.
When I go to look at the summation I get from my handler, he's like, if it ever came down to it, I don't think I could do that to my kid.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't even have a kid, and I don't think I could do it.
Sorry. And I, of course, have to end that thing by blowing my fucking nose again. It's in the middle of a mold bloom right now, right where I live, and COVID's on an
that sucks.
upswing. So, everything is awful. Well,
Now,
whatever.
this is interesting, because we talk about Lawrence of Arabia here.
Do you remember the time Bubba showed us the moving photographs?
The motion pictures. I remember. He worked so hard to bring the light machine all the way out here.
Father carried the machine over the sands and through the city.
He brought it to teach us an important lesson, that what may seem impossible is not. Like Lawrence crossing the uncrossable desert.
I thought it was about loyalty, never leaving anyone to their fate, like when Lawrence went back alone to save his friend.
It must have been very hard on Father, carrying it all that way.
It was about fighting your own demons, never letting them claw you down.
Or he just wanted to show us something he'd enjoyed from the world outside. The world we will never see.
Carrying it like the priests of the enemy are doing now, just to show us their moving pictures.
Sister, Wait. What did you say, little brother? About the priests?
They are pulling things through the city. Boxes and food. Weapons. I don't feel sorry for them.
The enemy is on the move. They cannot be allowed to reinforce their positions.
That's why I was talking about the moving pictures. This is just like Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia. And literary analysis. I've never seen that.
I've actually never seen it. There's so many things that I've never seen I only hear about and have opinions formed through other people's opinions.
Yeah. It's funny, my parents are classic movie buffs, and they showed us a lot of old movies, and that's still, they never showed me that one. I don't know why. I hear that it's one of those movies that it's old, but it's good, but it's old on multiple levels. And while its quality is held up, the other parts of it haven't. But I don't know. I will say I
mean, a movie made about the Middle East in the '60s is not something you'd expect to be
particularly
PC.
Culturally sensitive. But like, I love that they start engaging in literary analysis because that's so human. That's what people do. And I've been wanting to talk about this. So, okay, I've been rewatching Black Lagoon. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have heard of it. It is one of those animes that is on a list of things I'd like to see someday, but I just never get around to it. The only anime I've seen is the first half of Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann and all of the broadcast episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion. I've never seen the final movie.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think?
I've never seen End of Evangelion, but I hear it's a trip.
That's Evangelion. It's all. Well, seeing. I hear that Hideaki Anno, the man who made it, fucking hates Evangelion. It is especially towards the end. He's always struggled with pretty severe depression. And basically, he was having an extended depressive episode while the whole thing was ending. and the whole thing is basically a journey through his mind, and he hates that people have all these dumb opinions on it. So he's had, and it's also the most brilliant thing he's ever done, and that he has to fucking live with that, knowing people are picking through his brain and it will never die because so many people love it. And I will also say, I've heard.
I will say it. I thought it was hilarious. The end. What I hear about the end of the rebuild, which was in order to be happy, all you need is a big titty GF.
Yeah, pretty sorta. I haven't seen like. From what I hear about the end of the rebuild, it is significantly more complicated than that. But that's an element. Yeah.
All you really need is someone who loves you. But I like that the person he finally figures out who loves him is just a big titty GF. A big titty Genki GF.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, she is. She's fucking bonkers. But, and I've also heard this said about Evangelion. It's, how do I put this? If you're not suicidal, look. If you're not suicidal and you want to feel suicidal, watch Evangelion. If you're suicidal and want to not feel suicidal, watch Evangelion. Because something about it is depressing as fuck. But I've heard this from multiple people. If you are in a really, really dark place, something about it tends to dig people out of it. Like, I've heard people credit it with them not committing suicide. And, like, because it is so dark. But if you're also, everything is dark for you, it has a habit of just sort of hollowing out the bad stuff, too, as it hollows you out in general. And it lets you move on.
Well, I understand that. I mean, the very end is him working through his depression and seizing the will to live again.
And everybody telling...
And then they made End of Evangelion, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's why everyone applauds. That's why everyone tells him congratulations at the end, including the Penguin. But yeah, like, okay, so the thing about Black Lagoon is, for you and anyone who's heard who hasn't watched it, the original Japanese audio is pretty good. The English dub is a work of art, and it's worth skipping maybe not worth skipping the Japanese audio if you're a huge fan, but you should start with the English dub and see whether you want to move on, because it is, especially as it goes on, it's just unbelievable. It is both extremely well acted by a bunch of actors who mostly do kid stuff, and this is this is a series where there's a video on YouTube it is called Black Lagoon, the fucking short version, and it is every time that these characters say the word fuck, and it breaks 200 over the course of 24 episodes, and that's like, it's really funny, it's really dark, it's brilliant, and it's basically a thesis in existentialism. Like, they literally lift passages out of, they literally lift dialogues out of Sartre and Camus, were two big existentialist writers, and put them into the anime as characters developing themselves by yelling at each other. On top of over-the-top action sequences where people blow up cars with pistols, and there's one character who has swords attached to ropes, and she uses them to cut up cars, and it's just wild. It is great. And I remember seeing a comment on an intro to it, and this person was talking about, it's a great example of how not every good anime has to be about, existentialism or philosophy, and he chose that anime as an example, which, again, is literally about existentialism to the point of quoting things. And I will talk about how I talk about all the time, because I'm an English major and both insufferable about it and will have to find some use for the degree. Well, how basically being worthy of literary analysis makes a film or book or whatever a lot more likely to stick around. Like, you'll get something like Hamilton, which Hamilton's I understand it is very passé these days, because it's, because of political reasons I'm not going to go into, but it's something that is at once beautiful and very worthy of literary analysis. There's a lot to dissect there, and it doesn't give any
we have no
easy
time.
answers. Good point.
Bye.